Welcome to Technomics, a podcast that explores the intersection of technology and the economy. Hosted by Robin Ituli and Jeremy Nelson, Technomics is brought to you by Insight. The host's opinions, while mostly brilliant, are their own.
All right, welcome to Technomics Episode 1. I'm just going to go ahead and call this the Now I Have to Worry About That Getting Hacked Car Edition. My name is Robin Ituli. I'm the Senior Manager of Content and Creative for Insight, and with me is my co-host,
Jeremy Nelson, Manager of Professional Services.
How's it going?
Doing great. How you doing, Robin?
Busy. Like super busy. Isn't summer supposed to be slow?
That's what I was hoping. I haven't seen it, but that's what it's supposed to be.
Oh, not happening for me, I'm afraid. But it's been a busy week everywhere. We had a couple big things happen out in the tech universe. Windows 10 launched yesterday.
Big day.
Lots of fanfare. And there's also been a lot of news this week around cars getting hacked, which has me so freaked out.
Especially when you read some of the articles about the hacks in motion or the actual exploits themselves and what they can do. Very, very scary.
It's really unnerving, but we'll dive into that a little bit more. And then a little bit of a meta discussion around what is a tech company. Just kind of an interesting topic given that it's earnings season, and you hear a lot of analyst reporting going out and talking about, the tech sector, and the first names that get brought up are like LinkedIn and Facebook, and the initiatives that are driving them are things like internet supplying flying solar-powered drones. That sounds like a tech company.
Yeah. And it's not what you would typically associate with your traditional internet-based company, right?
Not in the least. To start out, let's go to the big newsmaker this week, which is Windows 10, the new operating system from Microsoft. It has been getting a lot of attention in the last couple of days for a few reasons. One, it is completely updating the entire suite of services, going to almost a mobile first mentality, which is really, really interesting to see. I haven't played around with it on a tablet or anything other than a desktop at this point, but I'm still very intrigued by it.
I've got it right here on my Surface.
How's it working?
It works great. I actually really, really enjoy it. And I think the most interesting part of the launch of Windows 10 isn't necessarily the operating system itself, the technology that's in the operating system. I think it's more, again, in the conversation here on Technomics is, what does this mean for Microsoft?
So let's talk consumption for a minute, because that's, it's kind of the name of the game anymore. Mm-hmm. What did they do differently this time?
Especially with Microsoft. Their whole mantra now is consumption. And if you look at it, if you look at the way that they're distributing Windows 10, if you look at the way that it's built, it's very much centered around services, cloud-based services, integrating people into the things that matter to most of them over the internet. And a lot of that is being served out of cloud-based infrastructure. And so a big push coming from Microsoft is based around consumption of cloud-based services. And that's where they're gearing their enterprise customers to.
One of the big things, this is kind of a sidebar to consumption, that I have seen in pretty much every single article that I've read on Windows 10 thus far, the start menu is back.
The start menu is back. They don't call it start. It's just a little Windows key, but it is very much the program launcher that everyone has come to love, hate, and appreciate. Yeah,
I just thought that was funny. It was just kind of, as I scrolled through all the articles that I've gone through, definitely a mention for the start menu in all of them. I digress. Back to consumption, because I think this is probably the most interesting part, and particularly too for people like educators, getting access to different levels of Windows in a way that they really haven't before. And there's kind of always been like you could call it the Home Plus version for schools, and now there's a lot more enterprise access and really more sophisticated features that they're going to be able to get their hands on.
Absolutely, especially if you look at it, so being a father of four, we have a lot of computing devices in the home, and so, access and control are things that are very, very top of mind in my home. A lot of those features required enterprise level services, whether that be Active Directory or a number of different things that are traditionally only provided by enterprises. And so Microsoft has obviously recognized that in that consumption model that you're talking about, is that they have provided those features to every version of Windows that's now out there. And then they provide that level of enterprise sophistication, whether that be a single account, or whether it be parental controls, website blocking, tracking of applications that are used. All of those are now being provided to the grand audience of Windows platform supporters through cloud-based services.
We use Microsoft so much in business, and you have to learn how to use it somewhere. It's almost this like really nice acknowledgement that Windows is sort of this, Microsoft is really this educator. They have a role to play in the education space, because I can't think of a business I've ever worked for where I wasn't using an email platform or a word processing platform that wasn't directly supplied by them. So
yeah,
interesting way of thinking of it.
And you can, and it's obviously with this launch of Windows 10, it's a more foundational change, I think, for Microsoft. You can tell that they've actually had a lot of roots in education for quite some time. So one of my hobbies is building and developing video games, and going all the way back, I think it's been almost 10 years now, is the way that Microsoft has identified education as a way to prepare the next wave of users, if you will, or the next generation of consumers of their products. They created a gaming platform, or a game development platform called XNA, and they actually built curriculum that could be used anywhere from grade schools all the way up to colleges for teaching students how to actually develop games based off of this platform. They gave it away absolutely for free, and you could publish games on your Xbox, on a tablet, or on your PC, distribute it through the web. It was really flexible. But again, going back to your comment, they definitely recognize the value in education and building and fostering that growth of their products and their future consumers.
That's a lot of foresight. I want to go back to your comment about next gen. So it's a look forward, look back moment, right? When Windows came out with Windows 8 in 2012, is that right? 2012, yes.
Yep, it's been 3 years.
And it was very much a next-gen move, right? This was all about touch screens. It was all about two-in-one devices, and it was so responsive to kind of the hardware environment that was happening. How does it differ? Like, how has Microsoft evolved in the mentality around hardware influencing its software?
It's funny because it actually almost goes the opposite direction with Microsoft, right? Especially because they are a software company, but they're recognizing that marriage between the two is a lot tighter than it ever was in the past. The need for that, to make sure that hardware properly reflects the need of the software, is extremely critical. And I think a lot of that was driven by Apple, with the release of the iPhone and the subsequent release of the iPad, the way that they married software to a hardware philosophy. So like you said, with Windows 8, Microsoft is clearly trying to embrace that philosophy and try and fit into that category. And so they built an operating system that was driving mobile first, especially if you look at all the data around that time. When you compared, say, sales of a laptop to sales of an iPad, the iPad was winning hands down. I mean, they were just flying off the shelves at an incredible rate. And so it's pretty easy to see the mentality of build a mobile-based platform first and then worry about the desktop users. And obviously that had some of its drawbacks and downsides. So as we look at Windows 10, really what it is it's more of a marrying of both of those together, right? The realization that they need to continue to support the billion users that they have on desktops and traditional laptops, but at the same time embracing these future solutions around mobile first. Kind of going back to your original question, is that from what I can see with Windows 10, it looks like they're continuing to drive software first and then enabling unique hardware solutions through software innovation.
So adoption, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Microsoft Windows users, and Microsoft is making the upgrade available as of July 29th in 190 countries. And that encompasses several different version users. So how quickly do you think we're going to see a mass adoption on this.
It's actually they've published some numbers already, which obviously it has to be going really well because organizations.
You don't talk about numbers unless they're good ones.
It's impressive, right?
Yes.
As of 24 hours after launch, Microsoft released that they had already had over 14 million downloads of Windows 10.
Good heavens.
Pretty incredible.
It's
especially when you consider that the average size of the download is about 3 gigabytes. So if you do the math on that, that is an extreme amount of data being pushed over the internet infrastructure. And that was one of the leading things leading into July 29th was, can the internet actually sustain a massive rollout of Windows 10? So if you go back and you look at Microsoft's strategy, they've obviously staggered it. So it's not just, hey, we flipped the switch and every Windows PC that qualifies now gets Windows 10. It's been a staggered rollout, and Microsoft actually reached out to the 3 largest content delivery networks. They're basically caching services like Akamai, a way to basically bring content out of a single data center and distribute it across the planet so it's as close to the users as possible. They reached agreements with the 3 largest ones to basically subscribe to up to, we'll have to check this number, but I believe it was 10 terabits per second of capacity per service.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Wow.
Phenomenal.
That takes a lot of planning. And now on to our second topic today. It is earnings season. Public companies are reporting their numbers in the weeks leading into August, and several companies caught my eye that have reported this week, and I couldn't help but take note of some of the news that surrounded them. So first of all, you have LinkedIn. Obviously, it's a social network. It is a platform for connecting with like-minded professionals, great for recruiters, awesome for professional development, and frankly for content publishers as well. It's a tremendous platform for getting the word out and connecting with specific audiences. So they had a fantastic quarter. The other one that, of course, reported was Facebook. Facebook had another great quarter based on some of their ad developments, but it's not necessarily the numbers, which is why I haven't mentioned any, that is really interesting. They get called tech companies, and then some of their commentary in the analyst interviews ends up being around things like laser-supplied internet, which is delivered by solar-powered drones that Facebook plans to recoup costs on the R&D for such a thing by supplying it to internet service providers.
Absolutely right, and that only benefits them. If you look at their entire model, it's completely dependent on having basically the entire planet on the internet. If you can get as high a capacity and cover as many people as possible, that's only going to be good for them.
No question, right? I mean, if you're going to make your primary revenue stream around advertising, the more people that you can advertise to, the more compelling that value proposition becomes. The thing that's so interesting to me is that it is taking some really tremendous technical capability to fulfill this vision. I mean, this is like internet from lace. I feel like when I said that line that I was like mocking an Austin Powers movie.
Absolutely. I think a lot of it is driven from, if you go back and look at the history of the internet and the way it's completely dependent on internet service providers, and even worse, or not necessarily worse, but even more importantly, is the local telephone providers. Very, very much hamstring the ability to deploy high capacity, high speed circuits to lots of areas. Unless you're in a very, very dense metro area, it was very challenging to get decent internet service. And, companies like Facebook, like Google, that are primarily online, they're internet-based companies, it makes it very challenging for them to be successful and to really reach the full potential of their extent. Obviously one of the things that they're looking to do is, what can we do to get out of that model? What can we do to disrupt that, to break that apart, and looking for unique and out-of-the-box ways to accomplish that.
How do you think an initiative like this compares to something like Google Fiber?
It's just another iteration of the same thing. It just maybe not, especially if you look at, right, so you talked about the expense of recouping all that money for these laser beaming internet drones, right? You look at what the R&D, the investment, and the build out of a drone of that capacity would be. But if you compare that to how much it costs to trench up an entire metropolitan area, to extend fiber, to either purchase fiber from existing telephone companies, to then light it up and to put in the infrastructure to provide gigabit speed internet to each home. I mean, that takes a lot of hardware, architecture, people to keep that on. It's not hard to see that if you're a company like Facebook that maybe doesn't have the complete size of Google today, that maybe you look for other creative ways of extending it, or parts of the country or even the earth that extending fiber like that just isn't a reality.
I think the impact of some of these initiatives, I mean, like, let's be honest, it's based in business, but the way that they're couched so often is around knowledge, right? I mean, the ability for people to have access to knowledge on the internet is a profound experience, right? It's the knowledge is power principle personified a million times over. What is the impact of that these are really positioned, and I guess I ask this to the universe as well as to you, but these are really being positioned as philosophical and philanthropic efforts?
It cracks me up. I don't know. Do you ever watch that show, Silicon Valley?
I haven't.
It's an HBO show.
I'm a laggard.
It's absolutely hilarious because it does kind of poke fun at that exact mantra, right? We're making the world a better place. And then you fill in the blank, right? Yes, there are things that are definitely huge benefits, right? The ability to have access to that amount of knowledge and research and content is phenomenal. It's obviously advancing the human race. And so it's very, very valuable. But at the same time, it's also very self-serving. It's just a reality because most people are driven to do great things because chances are on the back end, you're going to get something back, right? Whether they call it karma or if it's any other type of interest, it's still kind of, I do this because in the end, I'm hoping that maybe I'll get something in return.
Who's going to be next, and what do you think the technology that they're going to develop is to deliver internet to the known world?
It's really hard to know what that's going to be. It's hard to beat just the type of connection that you get from the traditional hardwired. It's very, very challenging to get the response time and the capacities. Everything else is depending on open mediums that usually are radio frequency based. So if the exception would be this laser technology, but again, that the ability to actually spread that out and to really get the coverage is a little bit challenging. So most of the solutions that are coming to bear definitely rely on that RF. And so whether that's satellite based, we're seeing a lot more of that. That's the primary way here in the United States of extending internet access out to rural areas is through satellite based services. Great for the downstream, very, very challenging to send anything up, and you got roughly a full second of time for data to go up into space, back down, and then return again. So not ideal way to experience the internet, but it is there. The other one is that if you look at Google's balloons, those are one of my favorites, where they basically have the same type of concept as satellite based, just a little bit lower down, and they're these huge weather balloons that kind of float around and provide internet hotspots. So I think there's a lot of brilliant people looking at this in very, very unique ways. Unfortunately, I don't think anything has really come out that's going to be that thing that fixes all of it. It's something that will happen in probably the next 5 to 10 years, I would imagine.
It's amazing stuff, that's for sure. segment today we are calling So now I have to worry about that being hacked, the car edition. In the past couple weeks, there have been some relatively major articles covering cars being hacked. I mean, full on, like, stop your transmission being hacked, more as proof points than as actual incidents, thank goodness. But one of them comes from a Wired article written by Andy Greenberg. It's titled "Hackers Remotely Kill a Jeep on the Highway with Me in It." It's a really great read because you're not in a car when you're reading it. But he talks about they take over the air conditioning on full blast, which he didn't mind because it's July outside of St. Louis. So, AC necessary. Putting on a hip hop station at full volume, and his inability to change anything, right? Can't turn down the volume, can't change the channel. But later, once he gets onto a highway, they cut the transmission. And his thoughts are immediately turned to the semi rolling up behind him far quicker than the slowly rolling Jeep, which is now entering into an uphill passage. So his description of it is actually just so elegant for the state of panic that he must have been in, or any of us would have been in, right? I mean, that's really scary to think that, I sort of depend on my car's operating system to help me navigate or at least dial safely. What say you? What'd you read?
Well, absolutely. The one that actually scares me more is, part of my responsibilities is, I'm on an airplane fairly often. And the one that scares me was the hack where they actually broke into the flight controls of the airplane, and they were able to, mid-flight, take control and shift the actual plane from side to side. As terrifying as it would be to be driving down the highway and have the engine, the transmission disengage or my radio change, obviously that can do a lot of damage and is very dangerous. But for me personally, the one that scared me was that airplane. And they were both done through basically the same method, is going after the entertainment.
What entertainment is in a cockpit? Can I just ask that question?
It's not necessarily that it's in the cockpit. It's because everything is so connected, and it's the same story with the car. The focus of these transportation providers, these folks who make these vehicles that we use for transportation, is to bring the conveniences of home. The conveniences being connectivity, being entertainment, being content to us while we are between points A and points B, whether that be a car, whether that be an airplane. And so in both of these instances, the entertainment systems, whether it was the car's, radio and in-dash entertainment system, or the one that's used for broadcasting movies on an airplane, are used to not only gain access to the entertainment system, but everything else that is within that, that vehicle, and computerized to then ties together and is able to be controlled.
I mean, that is a multi-endpoint network that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. How do you protect from that?
Exactly. Well, I mean, number one, from the perspective where I sit, is the key is obviously separation. The entertainment infrastructure that you put into either one of those vehicles needs to be completely separate from the vital systems that keep the vehicle operating in a safe manner. And obviously, those controls are overlooked. It was probably seen as a way to merge connectivity for entertainment as well as some of the needs of these more complex vehicles that we drive. The ability to report maintenance records or problems with the engine or any other types of malfunctions that may occur. Connectivity is extremely important. They're monitored, they're tracked, they're collected, they're actioned on, probably mid-flight or mid-trip on these vehicles. And so, I think the use of, or the concept of trying to consolidate and leverage existing resources made it where they didn't provide the level of separation necessary for safety.
Oof. I mean, who owns that? This one has me really riled because I don't really see my car when I think about this. I see the two car seats in the back. Mm-hmm. And so who owns this issue? You can't provide a recall. Actually, you can provide a recall that big. We just lived through a 37 million vehicle recall this year for something equally terrifying. I mean, does each car designer need an infrastructure architect on the scene? Is this a new career path for someone who is passionate about cars and technology?
Absolutely. I don't see how you can't anymore. If you're going to go down the path of providing the services, you need to do your due diligence and provide it in a way that will keep people safe, would be my opinion.
I guess the other question too is not just a design and architecture one, but who becomes a player? This is a device conversation, right? Your car is the end point. I mean, are Symantec and Intel Security and Trend Micro going to suddenly have logos appearing when I fire up my engine?
It wouldn't be too far. I mean, that doesn't seem too far-fetched, especially, if you go back a few years and look at the acquisition of McAfee by Intel. You have a processor, a microprocessor organization purchasing a security software organization, and they seem very disconnected. But when you start thinking about security at a layer where maybe it's not being thought about, so maybe we don't look at necessarily the folks who are writing the entertainment software. Maybe that security is now baked into the actual chips that fire it up. So maybe it won't be a splash screen where it says McAfee when you fire your in-car entertainment system, but it may be, instead of just Intel inside, it could be Intel secured inside.
That's a really interesting thought. I look forward to the eventual YouTube ads that get shown for Toyota and Intel security.
Just
right?
So you can turn on the radio?
Maybe. I'm not sure how this manifests, but somebody with big ideas for advertising is definitely going to be in on this.
I don't know. If I were at Sirius XM, I would probably consider that a premium subscription service that, sometimes it's challenging to provide the value to somebody, but if they're willing to sit through a few ads that are pushed down, maybe that would be a compelling business opportunity.
It's all about the content, Jeremy.
That's right.
It is all about the content. We should add that the other major thing that happened in the span of the last couple weeks was that the OS for OnStar was compromised. So, there's right there that is communicating exactly like you said, communicating an engine issue or, a failed system or an emergency situation. So, a lot of things that we come to rely on, I think, take for granted. And this actually has me thinking about an article I read in TechCrunch just this past week about we just don't have any idea how our technology works. And I think the headline was something like technology is magic. We work in the technology industry. We live this, we breathe this, but there are a lot of people for whom it's just like abracadabra. And I think cars are definitely a place where it's always been sort of a wonder. You go back to the beginning when they were horseless carriages and it was, its own kind of magic. Same rules have always applied, right?
Yep, absolutely. And I think it just boils down to, it's that benefit versus sacrifice. I think, especially this day and age, we are definitely willing to take on more risk and to sacrifice privacy for convenience and connectivity. Connectivity is that convenience. And as technology continues to emerge and grow and extend itself into new places within our lives, we're going to find that we're going to have to sacrifice security and privacy in order to make that happen.
Even while driving.
Even while driving.
All right. Well, we thank you so much for listening to this first episode of Technomics. We will be back with you next week with more ideas from the headlines. And if we're lucky, we're going to maybe find a guest to talk to us about technology and recruiting and the very competitive marketplace for brilliant tech minds.
Thanks for listening. You can find all of our shows on iTunes. Join us next time for another episode of Technomics.